Hello, everyone. Today is Wednesday, September 23rd. As always, I'm your host for Collectibles and Coffee, Edward Nguyen. There was no stream yesterday. I was out helping a friend do some moving, so I wasn't here yesterday. There's a lot to go over today, so we'll hop right in. My beverage choice today, iced coffee, tiny splash of hazelnut creamer, not too much else going on. So, in my last episode on Monday, we talked a little bit about bubbles. We kind of talked. There's a lot to go on. Release week. It's kind of a fairly turbulent week. There's always a lot to talk about here. Wanted to continue the discussion about bubbles a lot. I think one things that I had mentioned in the episode that I really do want to hammer home is that if you are looking to be a small business owner, if you are already a business owner, if you're looking to apply a subset of skills that are important to the real world, I know most of us don't have any sort of intention of doing this forever, or most of us don't have this going on as a full-time gig. If this is something that you really want to grow, if this is something that you want to be able to apply to your real life maybe after this, I would highly implore you to have an understanding of economics, of business. I said it before, a lot of these skills will transcend just collectibles in general. Being able to invest in things maybe down the line, right? If you're looking at investment properties, for example, or maybe looking at stocks, a lot of the principles that you can learn here, that you can learn from economics, from business, from real world examples, from the news, these are all important things that most people should add to their arsenal, mainly because, again, the skills are more important than what goes on in just collectibles. We look at these things, a lot of us trivialize it as just a children's card game. At the end of the day, it is. At the end of the day, we are just selling cardboard. But there are a lot of principles, there are a lot of concepts that do apply to the real world. I think having an understanding of these principles is very important for anyone who really wants to look beyond just what we're doing right now. So today I'm going to talk a bit more about bubbles. That was something we had touched on towards the tail end of the episode last time. This is something that I'll talk about a little bit more today. We'll look at a very real example. This is something that's kind of close to home for a lot of us, for those of us who are Americans, for those of us who are alive at the time. This is in reference to the housing market in the early to mid 2000s. A lot of us may have been a little bit too young to fully comprehend what was going on, but a lot of these impacts are things that we have felt in the stages of our life as we were growing up and as we had to kind of deal with the aftermath of this. So that's one of the things we'll look at first. That's kind of our real world case study. We'll kind of see how it had an effect on economies, how it affected the market in general, how it affected the collectible market. Granted, it was a different time, right? We're talking 12 to 15 years ago. This may have been before a lot of us had even got our start into collectibles, into Magic, into Pokemon, what have you. Different era at the time, very different things going on. But again, when we look at the real world, history does tend to repeat itself. A lot of these principles are still in play. They are still relevant today. And because we don't fully understand the aftermath until afterwards, right? We can't really say a bubble that we were in a bubble, that a bubble is bursting, of course, until the bubble is already burst, at which point it's already in hindsight. And often we don't get to see that for quite some time afterwards. So whatever stage of a bubble that we may be in right now, we really won't know what it looks like until several years down the line. So that's one of the things we'll be exploring today. And then we'll kind of go back. We'll kind of understand, again, some more real-world principles, understand what hype looks like. There's a lot of hype going on with the product, with the market right now. And in conjunction with that, we'll kind of be explaining and looking at FOMO as well. This is something that's also well-documented, well-studied. It's something that's really started to come to light in the more recent years. So we'll kind of break that down because it's really kind of a corner piece to investing nowadays. We'll review that, kind of look at some examples as well, and then we'll wrap it up with some PWCC. There are some things coming up It's really starting to draw a lot of attention, so I do want to bring attention to it. I had mentioned last week we did see the lots. Now they're about halfway through, or 5 days in. There's 5 days left. Some of these we'll look at and see how they're starting to play out, and see where my predictions were at, and kind of see how much action we want to take on them. This is likely something I'll review again on Friday and then on Monday. It is repetitive. We are looking at the same things, but it is important to understand the timeline and the evolution of these, just to provide us some context and then give us some opportunity to look towards the future. So let's get right in. U.S. housing market. This is something that we were familiar with. It really started before the bubble burst, right? That's kind of really the end stage of it. On something as big as the housing market in the entirety of the U.S., it's not something that happens very quickly. Even where we are right now in the collectibles market, even though we did see individual things happen overnight, in the context of collectibles, really some spotlight on individual cards, on individual products, the majority of what we are looking at tends to happen over a period of time. In the case of the U.S. housing market, this was something that happened over a period of several years. We can kind of trace this to early 2000s, 2000, 2001, 2002. We were kind of looking at an era where the value of prices and the value of homes were starting to appreciate. Hey, Steven, thanks again for joining us on the stream. I had this in the midday. I know some people do enjoy listening to this during the midday, so that's kind of why I had it here. I didn't really want to compete in the same time slot as a lot of other people, so thanks again for hopping in chat. So the value of homes, they are increasing. A lot of people were becoming homeowners. During this era, kind of the early to mid 2000s, it was reported that a higher percentage of people were homeowners than in quite some time. There's a lot going on here, mainly because interest rates were starting to drop. Interest rates is the federal rate that that banks are recommended that they trade to each other, they provide loans to each other at. When it's low, interest rates are low, your mortgages become low, right? Because banks know that they can take a loan out against another bank at a very low rate. So as a result, because they deal in volume, right? Each individual transaction is not worth a lot, but when they deal in volume, when you're talking about billions and billions and trillions of dollars potentially being exchanged, being traded, being loaned, being held, then small changes in interest rates usually results in a lot of money. So as a result, during this time when interest rates were low, it allows people to take mortgage at a low rate. Houses can be financed or refinanced at a lower rate than before when people are borrowing against a bank for their home. This is important. And as a result, this is a big deal for a lot of people. I mean, because at this time when we were talking low interest rates, we were talking low, like lifetime low. Like I think prior to this, we weren't really looking at interest rates this low since like the 70s and 80s. Because you have to remember in the 80s, when there was kind of a rapid era of inflation, interest rates have to go up in order to help stabilize the economy and counter that rate of inflation. So when these rates are this low, you have a lot of people who, to be perfectly honest, and I don't mean this to offend anyone, they had no business owning a house at the time. They were unable to do so. Houses were skyrocketing in price, but people felt like this was a good time to buy. This was a good time to get into being a homeowner because of how low interest rates were. So you had a lot of people that definitively could not afford their home, which was already propped up by this bubble, by this inflation, by this trend of people wanting to own homes. So a lot of house prices were well above what they should be based on the market. And these people were getting in, they were buying homes. And then at some point, these record low interest rates were unsustainable. So similar to the 1980s, right, we do see this track repeat itself. Similar to the 80s, the Federal Reserve was forced to raise interest rates, and they actually continuously raised interest rates. And they continuously did so in order to combat, right, the economy just going crazy when it's booming, in order to counter inflation, because things were just going so out of control, so high. So when the interest rates raise, at some point, it becomes unsustainable. It may seem a little bit counterintuitive. Why would you think that a booming economy needs to be slowed down. Why do we need to have rates to counter this? And yes, it is counterintuitive. You think a booming economy is good. But because there are so many moving pieces, that a booming economy, especially if it's rampant, if it's out of control, is not good. And we do see this. We have seen this with China's economy. We have seen this with Japan's economy in the past, that you can't have this exponential rate, this booming rate, and have it be sustainable. It's absolutely not healthy for the economy. Hey, David, how's it going? Good to see you. It's not healthy, and that's not what an economy looks like. That's not what commodities look like. That's not what assets look like. It's not healthy long run. It has to, even if we are seeing a continual increase, it has to happen slowly and steadily. That's why a lot of people over the past few years have been predicting a recession that's coming up in the US. COVID certainly played a part of it, right? We see high unemployment rates. A lot of people are out of jobs. Interest rates have been slashed again. I believe we are at 0.25% right now, set by the Federal Reserve not too long ago. This is important because usually low interest rates is a way to stimulate the economy. We probably won't see interest rates this low again, and that's really due in part largely to COVID, kind of where we are right now, because the economy really does need that boost to kind of get going. For the past decade or so, we have seen the Dow Jones really set new records. We have continuously see this. We constantly see that it's breaking new price points at which it hasn't been before. And this is not entirely too dissimilar to the housing market in 2005 and 2006. At this time, the Dow Jones, where it was at, actually set record rates as well. And it was continuing to do so because the growth was so out of control, because it was just booming so quickly. And of course, what has happened 2006, 2007, this is where we see the bubble really burst in the housing market. The interest rates, because they're starting to raise, the interest rates are starting to go up, and they're going up continuously. Banks are forced to increase their mortgage rates. People can no longer take a mortgage rate out at a low interest rate that they were able to enjoy before. As a result, a lot of people are very much no longer able to afford the house that they had purchased, 1 or 2 years back. And most of these people who may have already been financially struggling before are in a real pickle now. They're in a really, really tough time because their mortgage rates, we're talking, I think, if we're looking at like 2% at the low, right? As low as, depending on when you got, if you got like 2.5% or 0.25%, 0.1%, 1% or something, right? A lot of these people are looking at like 5 to 6% now, which is substantially higher than where they were before. If they couldn't already afford the house that they were in, right? This is a real tough spot. So what did we see? We started seeing foreclosures on homes. Banks were seizing back. New Century, one of the largest real estate investment groups out there, they actually filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, I want to say in 2007, 2008, in that era. Right? Simply because people couldn't afford to keep the homes that they were in. And this was really the bubble bursting. Houses are starting to crater in price. I'm sure if you really go out and ask people who are homeowners around this time, anyone who bought houses in this era, kind of in the aftermath, 2008, 2009, 2010, a lot of people got incredibly good deals on their homes, especially for people that had to sell out before. The people that bought in 2005 and 2006, kind of at the height of the bubble, they were probably paying the highest possible price on their house at the time. And if they couldn't afford it, a lot of people had to sell those same houses for a loss after a few years in 2008, 2009, 2010, most likely because they couldn't afford to stay in their home due to the nature of the recession, right? People kind of refers to the recession of 2008. This was kind of when the market was at a low historically, right? This is when President Obama was kind of starting to pick up the pieces. He was forced to deal with the aftermath of this. One of the things that he pushed so heavily was to try and lower the unemployment rate to get Americans back and working. So that was kind of what the timeline of that bubble looks like. There's a lot more details. This is something I would encourage people to look at. I bring this up because this is something that's close to a lot of us. Right, 2005, I was 16 at the time, right, way too young to do this. In 2007, 2008, I was just starting college. I was a freshman in college. So a lot of these I didn't really have to deal with, right? But looking afterwards, right? Looking for people who would have graduated by the time I was 21. It was 2010, right? We're kind of at the tail end of the bubble bursting, right? We are looking at the upswing, right? This is when people like myself, people my age, are getting out of college or looking at the real world, and they're starting to feel kind of the effects of this. So that's kind of the housing bubble in a nutshell. Kind of very short. There's a lot more going on. I just gave a very, very scratching the surface overview. This is something that you should look more into. Think back to when you were where you were at the time. You may have been young, right? Maybe talk to your parents. How did this affect their decisions in terms of buying a house, maybe? Where they're at that point. Just to provide some historical context, because this is, again, something that kind of affected us. But in terms of the economy, how it affected the world, this is a repercussion that was what felt around the world. A lot of economies did kind of have to deal with a small recession, probably not as major as the US, but because the global economy is so closely tied together, what happens in one major market like the US is going to affect every other major market around the world. So one of the most important things to note here, and why I really bring attention to this, is it's pretty hard to find a lot of data back then because Collectibles nowhere near as big. It's hard to find a lot of data on this. A lot of this is just kind of based on my recollection, some small amount of data, some anecdotes I could find back then on card prices, on what things were happening. But it's important to note that at this time, this is when forums were so popular. I was still trading on Magic Online Trading League, on MTG Salvation. A lot of power, a lot of old school, a lot of what we now consider old school stuff. Obviously old school wasn't a format at the time. Vintage was still kind of in its infancy. Vintage and Legacy had only separated in 2004. Back then it was called Type 1, Type 1.5. Type 1.5 actually had the restricted list of Type 1 of Vintage at the time as its banned list. And then 2004, they completely separated them. They started to call them Vintage and Legacy. And the Legacy, as we now know it, started to develop its own identity. It had its completely own ban list. Time, right? Like one of the earliest things, right? Something that's been banned continuously. Bazaar Baghdad, banned in Legacy, but it's not restricted in Vintage, right? And then there were kind of a lot of these changes. That was really what made Legacy what it is and how it kind of developed its own identity. So a lot of these old school cards, Vintage, Power, Duels, old school cards, a lot of people in Europe were starting to buy them in large quantities. This was a very big thing among Europeans. Nowadays, I would contribute this kind of beginning as to why old school is so popular in Europe. A lot of people wonder why a lot of Europeans do own a lot of Power, a lot of nice old school collections. I would say that this is kind of the beginning of it, and this is due directly in part to the recession that happened. If you look at the historical trends of the exchange rate between the euro and the US dollar, the euro was actually getting one of the highest exchange rates around 2008 to 2009. It had steadily been climbing before in response to the recession, in response to the US recession, and it actually peaked at about 1.60 US dollars to the euro. And this is actually, at this time, this is the high it's ever been, and we have never seen it this high again. In the past few years, we've seen the euro kind of peak out at about 1.25 or so, and now it had kind of steadily gone down. And now, with COVID, with the current situation, it's actually steadily been climbing again, and it's actually getting pretty close to that kind of 1.25 number. It's not quite there yet, but because that's happening, I do suspect that we'll kind of see the Europeans, because they have an increase in buying power, maybe start to be looking at buying again, because it is profitable for them to do so. To expand on that a little bit, for people who may not be as familiar with exchange rates, what this means is that in 2008, right, if we were looking at 1 euro is worth 1.6 US dollars, right? Conversely, $1.6 gets you 1 euro. The reason this is good for them, the reason that's when that spread is large, that means it's good for the Europeans, it's good for people who are holding the euro, because what that means is that they have a lot of buying power. It's kind of hard to understand. It's a really weird concept, but if we look at then versus now, in 2008, something that was $1.6, it would cost them €1, right? Pretty straightforward. Nowadays, if a same item, right, if a same card costs $1.6, it's going to cost them more than €1 because right now €1 only buys 1.25 or so US dollars. So they'd be looking at an extra 25% probably. So you're probably looking about like 1.25 euros in order to get that same 1.6. So something that would have cost them €1 back then is now going to cost them 1.25 to have that same amount of buying power. So as you can see, when that gap is large, it's advantageous to be buying in one market and being able to arbitrage against another market. It's really the cornerstone of exchange rates. That's, again, a very simplified understanding of how exchange rates work. But to my recollection, a lot of cards were going overseas to Europe at that point because it was so profitable for them to do so. They could just straight up buy expensive cards at the time. This is 2008 we're talking about here. They could be buying power, they could be buying duels, and then with a favorable exchange rate, they could make a killing selling it back in Europe where prices likely were already higher than they were here. So they could take advantage of both the exchange rate and the difference in price between Europe and the US at the time. Granted, this isn't something that's super well documented. This is kind of fuzzy. This is largely anecdotal. I do remember this being a fairly common phenomenon among the forums. There were a lot of European dealers that were getting into this at the time because it was so advantageous for them to do so. Obviously, the market is a lot bigger now. There's more information going around. So it's a lot more streamlined, but I imagine a lot of the same principles do apply. So right now, right, how does this affect us? So we kind of are looking at overseas, right? We're kind of looking at all these different things, but we can still look back at the U.S. housing market bubble and kind of see how this affects us right now. In the aftermath, in the following years after the bubble burst, right? So 2008, 2009, 2010, right? Even the more kind of the first term of Obama's presidency, right? 2008 to 2012, we started to see the market kind of reach a low, and then it was slowly growing over time, right? Unemployment rates were slowly falling, right? People were starting to get back on their feet. Jobs were growing, right? We started to see the market slowly grow again. And if we kind of look at that now, right? In my mind, right now is when you want to be investing. This is when you want to be buying. Because even though prices are going up now, I suspect that when people do get on their feet in the next year or so, right, at some point, life will return to normal. Where we define as normal may be a little bit different than the normal that we were looking at a year ago, pre-COVID. But a lot of these prices, I don't think will ever hit the same low that they did before. And this is, again, kind of the nature of people slowly coming back to work, slowly being able to have a normal in their life, right? Like having a stable paycheck, right? These are things that are important to people. And when this happens, we may not see that much of a price change, honestly, right? Because if people who are able to collect unemployment from their job or whatever, people may not have as much disposable income. I don't really see prices changing that much because if anyone was recently picking up the demand in the hobby, they had recently rediscovered Pokemon, rediscovered Magic at the time, and they're getting back in, they may be incentivized to continue to do so. And if this is something that they'll continue to do, if they have a steady income again, and they're looking at a way to spend money, looking at a way to spend money that they may not have had access to during this time, that would keep these prices where they are right now inflated. And it is important to note that because a lot of the products that did come out this year were being allocated, there's probably a smaller print run of these sets compared to these sets from a year ago. So Core 2021, the set that came out in in July for Magic, probably a smaller print run compared to Core 2020 in 2019. It's really confusing, I know. Right, a year ago, that set probably printed much more. This year, they probably had to cut back in anticipation of the pandemic. A lot of stores have reported an allocation, right? Zendikar Rising, no different. A lot of these stores, probably less of it than they had a year ago. Wizards probably printed less in anticipation of the effects of the pandemic. So some of these products that are coming out this year, coming out right now, there may not be as much of it as some of these older sets. So in a year from now, if we do return to the pre-COVID norm, right? So if we're looking at fall in 2021, right? If 2021 looks like 2019, right? We have the same numbers, we have kind of the same demand, or even more, as more people did pick up Magic, more people did pick up Pokemon during this time, right? You have this shortage of product that was printed in 2020. There's just so much less of it because of COVID that in 2021, if people are trying to buy these again, right, there's just going to be a lot less of it. And what that means is that prices right now may actually get more expensive in the future, right? And then, right, so if we're looking to buy, right, anyone looking to buy a home right now, right, you're getting to enjoy that low interest rate. I believe the interest rate is actually at 0.25% right now, kind of similar to where we were in the middle of the recession, kind of at the beginning of the recession in 2008, because that's people wanting to. That's the Federal Reserve wanting to stimulate the economy. They have to offer banks a way to provide loans to be able to loan out money at a low rate. So anyone trying to buy a house right now, financially difficult. There's probably not a lot of people looking to buy, mainly because of the hardship that people are in right now. So buying a home right now, probably a pretty good idea. On the same vein, buying collectibles right now, I think it's a good idea. I think investing right now really makes sense. Obviously, you're kind of facing an upswing. There's a lot of demand, right? This is kind of where we'll be talking about the hype. We'll be talking about FOMO that kind of is directly correlated to this. We'll be talking about that in a moment, right? But these principles, right, if we draw parallels to these recessions in 2008, 2009, 2010, right, this is really a good time to buy. I'm not saying this simply because I'm trying to hype up collectibles, because I do own a store, right? Because I do deal in this market. But to me, if I had money to invest right now, I think this is a really good time for people to be buying. It is tough. It is an upswing. I think a big part of this channel is dedicated to how people can stretch their dollar the most, how people who are looking to be investing in collectibles, where is the safest way for them to park their money, right? Because we do need the full range of this. We do need people that make up the bulk of the business that for these companies, right? People do need to be buying standard cards. People do need to be buying the newest product for Pokemon in order to keep the game alive. But the fact that there's something there for everyone, for those casual players, collectors at the low level, while there's still something there for people who are looking to invest tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in this product, is really what gives this product a lot of longevity, a lot of life. And that's really what makes a lot of the investing possible, right? Because not every product can be success. Not every product can be worth a ton of money in the future. And that's really the risk that we take when it comes to investing, right? It is, at the end of the day, a gamble. You do have to kind of pick and fight your battles. Not everything that you invest in is going to be a success. And that's really kind of the difficulty of this. But again, I said this before, by understanding what happened in the past, by drawing kind of that parallel, 2008, 2009, 2010, we can help that guide our investing decisions right now. So with that being said, right, some of the product that we have coming out right now, this is release week. People have been asking a lot about Champion's Path. It is Pokemon, kind of a different area. Pokemon is a really popular market right now. When I had Charlie Herlocker on, he had kind of expressed it. He thought that Champion's Path was going to be a pretty big success. We're slowly starting to see it come out now. This is something that comes out on Friday. A lot of stores very, very, very heavily allocated on this. This is something that there's not a lot of. There is a short amount in supply. The demand is just through the roof as people are getting hyped about this product, as people are trying to buy into this product. The game stores, I know a lot of people were pretty short on it. The price is well above MSRP. And this is, again, there's a lot of hype for the set. A lot of people are pretty excited about the set. Pokemon knows that they always have that ace in the hole, right? Charizard will always be an ace in the hole for them. Any set that has Charizard is going to do well. This is kind of like one of the basic mantras that we've talked about before. This is something I said before on this channel, that Charizard, its nature, it's very iconic, right? It's been iconic since base set 1 in 1999. These sets that contain Charizard will do very well. Charizard VMAX, it's selling for like $2,000 on eBay on some complete auctions. People that have the product in hand that are starting to open it for singles, right? We can see some of these prices. If you look on Verbank, people are trying to sell the VMAX several $1,000s, like $2,000. That price will drop, obviously. The shiny Charizard V, same boat, right? People, it's like, I think the few auctions that have closed on eBay, people do short auctions in a very small period of time to try and get this product sold as quickly as possible, right? You're looking above $1,000 for that single as well. It's not clear how rare it is, mainly because a lot of stores being heavily allocated, they aren't really able to open this product in mass. So it's kind of very spotty in terms of data, in terms of how lucky did someone get versus how rare this card actually is. It's really hard to differentiate that right now. I imagine in the next few days, once we see a lot of people opening this product and trying to sell as quickly as possible, right? Realistically, if you're just kind of a casual player and you don't really care, getting like $1,100, right? Someone that opens this is probably going to try and sell it right away. We'll see this large glut probably Friday, Saturday, Sunday as people are getting their product. Monday as the product that gets shipped is starting to arrive to them. So it's hard to say what it looks like. It's hard to say what the demand is. That's kind of the big part of hype. And with hype, we have FOMO, right? FOMO is something we talked about before. FOMO is short for fear of missing out. At its core, it's something that's documented as a form of social anxiety. More often than not, it refers to kind of social phenomena. This is something that we see in social media, right? Fear of missing out is fear of not being present at a big social gathering, right? Usually kind of in terms of social context is, man, are my friends out doing something that I'm not a part of? Like, are they, going on some trip or, having a night out that I'm not a part of? It kind of creates this real anxiety. And it creates this sense that, if I said I didn't want to go out tonight, right, what might I be missing out in the future when my friends do go out again and maybe they do something really cool that I don't want to miss out on? In the context of investing, right, we see this on all levels, right? It doesn't just apply to collectibles. It applies to buying stocks, right? People are always looking for stocks that they can cash in on early, right? We saw this with cryptocurrency, with Bitcoin, kind of in 2017 into 2018, right? These are all things, right, that relate directly to FOMO. It referred to the housing market in 2000 and 2002, 2005, right? This is FOMO. People see that if people my age, right, referring to like any young adult at the time, are starting to go out and buy houses, right? I don't want to be caught living in an apartment forever. I should go out and buy a house as well. And this fueled people who couldn't afford a house to take advantage of what was a low mortgage rate to put their money into a house in something that they couldn't afford because they didn't want to miss out, right? Because, at its core, I don't know how long these interest rates are going to be this low for. I should buy now rather than potentially wait and have to pay a higher interest rate if the interest rate goes up, right? And then a lot of people, right, nowadays collecting this Champions path, right? A lot of this new set, it's in short demand, right? People get caught up. It's in short demand. I should go and buy it now. And then the next person that sees this, they try and go to that same website, to their same store. It's already sold out. And it's sold out. That's encouraging them to maybe expand their scope. Maybe they have to drive, instead of their store that's, 10 minutes from their house, maybe they have to go to this store that's 30 minutes from their house. to try and get this product on pre-order to be able to buy it. And then that's causing perhaps that sort of sell out, right? So these people that are trying to buy it, now they're certainly faced with the shortage of this product. It's not there. They can't order it. So maybe now they have to start going online, right? And that's really kind of how this builds up. This is kind of what the core of FOMO is, and why people are starting to create this feedback loop of, I don't want to miss out, I should buy it, right? The next person, they don't want to miss out, they should buy it, right? So one, because supply is so gutted right now, so heavily allocated, and because there's so much demand for this, right? Then missing out, people don't want to miss out, right? That's where FOMO is really kicking in strong with people. They want to try and get in now and trying to buy as much of it as possible because they don't know, one, when they can get more, right? And then once we see these prices on singles, right? If it is as rare as it seems, if there are as few of them as is being reported, right? If it's as hard to open, then, right, we're going to kind of see this cycle continue. People want to be buying this product and opening it and trying to hit that lottery card, right? Because that's kind of how these packs do as well as they do, right? Even with how random they are, even though how it is statistically unlikely that you will be hitting, right, like $1,000 plus card or whatever, because there's only 2 inside the set. People still want that rush. People still want that feeling of being able to spend, $80, $100 on these Elite Trainer boxes that are coming out, and then potentially being able to open that. Even though, right, statistically speaking, it's probably going to be much more rare that even if you buy, 10 Elite Trainer boxes, right, spend $1,000, I believe there's 10 packs in each. Right, you open up 100 packs, you're probably not going to be opening up this card. At which point, if you want the card, you should just bought it as a single anyways. Right, that's how math works. Right, if the value is truly that high, then stores would just be opening up their Elite Trainer boxes for singles as opposed to piecing it out and just selling the boxes to people. So that's really what FOMO is, right? We see it very prevalent. Because nowadays, because social media is so close together, because people are so connected to what's going on, people see what's happening online, that no one really wants to be missing out. And that's really, in my mind, I think that's a really dangerous thing when it comes to investing, when it comes to making smart decisions, because it's social anxiety, right? This is something that we feel very strongly about. This is something that most people are very, very aware of, right? A lot of us have experienced this in the past before, right? Like in some form or another. Everyone has been there, an opportunity where they missed out on something that they could have bought that would have done well, right? And this really applies to everything. This kind of goes all the way up, right? I know there are people that will say, man, I wish I had bought, Google in 1999 or whatever, I would have done so well, or could have bought Amazon. I could have bought Dual Lands a few years ago. I would have done super well there. I missed out on Power. I sold my Power too cheap at the time. Right, this goes on and on. There's this list of things that people don't feel like they should miss out on. And when they do, it feels really bad. And then they remember that for next time, which changes their fundamental behavior. It changes how they're going to act, how they're going to respond when they see this opportunity again, because they don't want to miss out. Right, and that's really the danger of it. That's, in my mind, not smart investing. That's not really how you come out ahead when you do this. It's important to be able to be level-headed, to think critically about what you're doing. This is something I really stress a lot on this channel, because I know a lot of people do try and get in, that people are trying to do what they can with their money to get the most value for their money. It's tough. I'm not envious of a lot of people. I'm kind of in that same space, right? It's like, it's all a matter of like, what can I buy right now that makes sense, that is going to be a smart investment, something that will pay off for me down the line. So that's kind of the nature of FOMO. I do kind of want to keep it there. This is something we'll revisit again. I do want to look at some more examples. We have talked PWCC before. I do want to pull up the PWCC marketplace right now and look at some auctions. I had made some predictions when these first came out. I think when I made the video last week, it was a little bit before they came out, right? 10-day duration, as mentioned at the beginning. We were about halfway through. There's about 5 days left. Most of these, actually all of these, will be ending on the 28th in the evening, 6 to 9 Pacific time. So And in very quick succession, they all end in that window. So looking at them right now, we're halfway through. We can kind of see how a lot of these have shaped up. So I'll go ahead and pull up my screen here to be able to share. Let's bring that to the top. So the screen I have shared here, this is the marketplace. I have this filtered highest bid first for Pokemon cards. We can say 843 auctions. So here, right, like what's doing well? So when I look at this, because there's so much to filter through, realistically, a lot of the stuff that's being sold, right, don't care about. It's just stuff that's not interesting. So the two things I sort by when I look at them is searching for Pokemon. We can do search for Magic later. We'll kind of look at those. If we have time, if we get there. But highest bid first, right? We are looking at the most expensive auctions that are available right now, right? You can see 5 days, 7 hours, 33 minutes left. These are the most expensive auctions. So those are worth noting. And then number of bids highest first, right? Most number of bids, right? This top auction, 97 bids on this item, right? 66, 56. So this is important because this is what has the most attention on. This is what has the most number of eyes. This is what people are trying to fight over. This is what is really interesting to people. So I sort by these two just to kind of see what people are interested in, what people are like putting a lot of attention to. So looking at these, right, we will revisit this shortly, but let's go back and look at highest bid first. So what is most expensive? What are people putting the most money into? So top two auctions, we see first edition Holo Charizard, number 4 BGS 9 Mint. There's two of these. I imagine these are probably two separate auctions. Let's see if we can look at the serial number. These are different serial numbers, so different auctions. There just happens to be two BGS 9 first edition Holo Charizards on market right now. 5 days left. We're halfway done. These are at $20,000 each. And these are described as premier Pokemon blue chip and among the hottest blue chips in the market. So what is a blue chip? A blue chip is terminology. It is derived from poker and poker chips. Blue chips are generally the most valuable. So in the terms of stocks, in terms of investing, whenever people refer to something as a blue chip stock or blue chip investment or a blue chip, it simply means an investment, a stock, an item, an asset, or a commodity that is stable and is doing very well. So an example of a blue chip stock, there's no real definitive line, right? It's not going to, there's no line where anything above this is a blue chip, anything below this is not. Usually for blue chips, people look at stability. It's a company that has been in business for a long time. These stocks have been stable in price. A lot of these don't really have massive upswings or downswings, right? Usually when there is a large upswing or downswing, that suggests some sort of instability or uncertainty, right? Most of these are stable. Most of these have very, very high market caps, right? We're looking at a market cap for the company in the billions. Some examples would be like Coca-Cola, for example, Walmart, right? These are things that are stable. They're a very stable business. They have a global presence, right? Everyone knows what Coca-Cola is. Everyone knows what Walmart is. There isn't really a lot that can happen that would heavily affect the price of that stock. So that's what blue chip is. You can find a lot more examples. Coca-Cola and Walmart, just kind of two of many. Again, not really a definitive line. We know Walmart, right, market cap like hundreds of billions. Coca-Cola, global brand, right? You can buy Coke in literally any country in the world. It's something that's well known, heard of. Blue chip, right? Charizard, kind of the same idea. Everyone knows what first edition Charizard is. Everyone has a pretty good idea. The art is iconic. Most of us can just picture the image in our head, think back to our childhood, right? People see that. $20,000 is the bid on these. I do suspect that this is pretty low, right? We see 42 and 38 bids on these. I imagine there'll be quite a bit more competition, right? We're only halfway through. There's gonna be a lot more eyes on this. These two, I think it's important to look at the price and see how they do in the future. These two auctions would be a gauge of kind of the top end for the market, right? Like a first edition Holo Charizard really the top end of the market, kind of like the most expensive individual card you can get. Seeing how these do would be kind of indicative of the direction the market is going in the future, and seeing what they look like. We scroll down, we see a lot of the top cards. There is a base set booster box here. This is not first edition. Important to note, I'd mentioned first edition booster box sold on Heritage probably about 2 weeks ago at this point, right? Those were the ones that were like almost $200,000. This is not first edition, right? Don't think that you're getting a steal at, $20,000 or wherever right here. This is not the first edition box, right? That's where all the money is. It's not to say that these boxes aren't valuable, but it's a ways off. It is interesting to see how high this box will climb, mainly because when you look at the first edition box, right, you may have people who are priced out of the first edition box that may be looking at the next best thing, which is a base set box, just not first edition. So, right, this kind of goes on the line, right? We have some more Charizards down here, right? We can kind of see the prices, right? These are two first edition Charizards. These are 8.5s instead of 9s. Right, 9s, $20,000, 8.5s, $15,000, right? So that 0.5 right now, we're looking at $5,000 difference in price in the bidding. Kind of similar number of activity, right? 44 and 27 bids, lots of eyes on it still. I imagine these will have a decent spread on them. The difference between a 9 and 8.5 is pretty substantial. That remains to be seen, right? Still 5 days out. So we'll kind of be following these. These are the big ones. I mentioned first edition Shining Charizards from the Neo Destiny, Neo Revelation sets, right? These are kind of the big cards in there. Right, this is some things I mentioned, right? Some things I want to keep an eye on, 13,600 and 11,000 on these two auctions, right? Pretty big deal. First edition factory sealed jungle, or Gym Challenge, I'm sorry. Right, we have some more booster boxes in here. We have a first edition jungle box, a first edition fossil box, another first edition fossil box, right? Kind of the big boxes. These are all WotC era, right? If we remember looking back at the sealed video, right? WotC boxes kind of like the cream of the crop when it comes to them. Not everything is going to be a base set, but that's not to say that these boxes don't have a fairly substantial amount of value still. These are all very iconic, right? There's kind of pseudo reserve lists, right? WotC era, unlikely to be reprinted again. So these boxes pretty expensive. We do see another first edition Charizard here. This is an 8, right? We're at $10,000 now. So the difference in one full grade from an 8 to 9 is $10,000 in bidding, more than double this price. Right? It just goes to show how substantial how substantial grading is when it comes to these old cards, and how much value there is in having a slightly nicer condition than before. Because the difference between like 8, 8.5, and 9, really not that much. A 9 possibly still have some imperfections on it, depending on what the subgrades are. Right, 8 is still considered to be like a near mint / LP card. So they're all gonna be pretty nice. But like we see, just a one difference of grade, like double the price, and that's really kind of the nature of grading cards highly. And if you have clean cards, it's worth spending the money and time to get them graded. If we keep scrolling down, we see a fair amount of Charizards down here still. Right, we're starting to look at like more play Charizards at this point, right? We're looking at PSA 7, PSA 6, PSA 5, 6,000, 100, 5,600, and $5,200. All kind of in that price. Still lots of action. I do expect these to end up quite a bit higher than where they are now. Now we're starting to kind of get down here. One thing I do want to note that I want to point out that we had talked about, 2019 Sun and Moon Hidden Fates Shiny Charizard GX, collector number SV49. This is a BGS Black Label. This is currently at $5,100. I did bring this up in one of my videos as a card to keep an eye on last week, right? 2019, this is a recent card. This card was printed within the last year, and it's getting this price. This card has kind of an interesting history. I think the first documented sale of this was on $10,000, is on Verbank. Someone had posted the sale. It was a confirmed sale. They had actually, I remember seeing a screenshot that shows a notification that this person received $10,000 or whatever it closed for on PayPal. It kind of generated this huge hype a lot of people who are opening this card were wanting to send it to Beckett right away. If they were clean, they were getting them graded, right? People were opening the packs if they got them, or people were trying to buy the most near mint copies they could find online. They receive them, send them off to Beckett right away. So there is a higher population of black labels on these. When I looked on the PWCC market research place, looking at them, looking at the prices, 10,000, really an outlier. For a while, they had slowly decreased in price as more of them hit the market, right? That's kind of the nature of people grading them. Everyone who grades them, everyone who has them, they think that they can get that, that $10,000 payday. That's reality. That's not the case. That's not how the market works. Obviously, the first one was one of one, right? Then becomes one of two, and then next batch like one of 10. Blah blah blah. I didn't look at the pop report. I don't know exactly for sure how many of them have the black label, are receiving that pristine 10. So this being at $5,100 is actually a pretty big deal. If you look at the history of them, for all auctions that are closing for the black label, the majority of them are below this price. A lot of them had dipped. There was a point when they were as low as like $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 on them. The fact that this is actually the second lot. This is 7 days out, and this is at $5,100 already. Makes me think that I'm not sure how much of this is real. It's very possible this card is real. This is a very iconic picture as well. It is shiny from Hidden Fates. It's pretty hard to open. The raw copies themselves are selling probably like in the $600 to $800 range. For a while, you could get them for like $300. They are exploding in price now. They're getting pretty expensive. They're getting pretty hard to find. Hidden Fates is kind of that, like, kind of similar to Champion's Path. It's hard to open. It's hard to find them in large quantities. So the fact that this is a 2019 card and it's already at $5,100 makes me think that there is actually going to be legitimate demand for black label cards going forward. We'll have to see how the black label cards from Champion's Path plays out. I imagine a lot of people are going to be opening them, trying to send them into Beckett right away for grading, and trying to get, that big black label 10 coming back. And we'll see how well they do. If this is real, there's 56 bids on it, so uncertain. We don't know how much of this is shill bidding. When we see how this plays out, right, this will give us a pretty good idea of how well grading cards do and if there's actually demand for modern era black labels. So enough on that. If we keep going down, we see some pretty common things, right? We're looking at Shadowless Charizard, so it's a BGS 9, so no longer first edition, but still kind of in that small print run. We talked about Shadowless. It's the next most rare after first edition, right? We had first edition base set. We had Shadowless, which similarly doesn't have the border. And then when you look at the unlimited run, there is that bordered, which is the most common form of base set cards. So Shadowless, still pretty rare. BGS 9, $4,600. I think this is pretty cheap right now. 5 days out. Obviously, there's ways to go. Now we're looking at some pretty interesting cards. So we have a Japanese Tropical Mega Battle Finals prize. This is population 1 of 1. There's none grade higher to this BGS 9. Some of these early era Pokemon Japanese cards are worth quite a bit of money, mainly because there's not a lot of them, right? We're talking about an era when Pokemon was much smaller. Trying to find these prize cards, right? Extremely difficult to do. They weren't given out in large quantities. They were usually given out for winning events, right? A lot of Japanese TCGs, right? You have a lot of prize cards. Yu-Gi-Oh does this, right? You have a lot of prize cards that were given out as trophies for events. Even though a lot of these cards have been reprinted to ground later in the context of Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Your commons, we're probably talking like bulk cards, like dimes, quarters, whatever. But the original card, the prize card, some of these are worth well into the thousands. And there's a very clear market for people who do buy prize cards because they're so sought after, they're so hard to find. So that's kind of this here. I'm sure that whoever is going to actively want this, a collector that wants this, is probably going to be paying through the nose for it. Kind of similar with this one right here, Pokemon Expedition for position only. This is a misprint. This is a very neat misprint. This is actually 9.5. If you see this, I don't know if you can see this on my screen. This is a bare picture. If you look here, I'm not signed in right now, so I can't see bare picture. If you look across the art, kind of in the middle of the Charizard, there's white text that says position only. There's a placeholder. I imagine that these were in test packs, usually kind of as an internal testing item. These weren't meant to be distributed to the public, so the fact that one of these got out is a pretty big deal. Probably not a lot of these in the world. Very, very rare misprint. So I imagine that there'll be a lot of collectors going for this, the people that do want this. And then now, as we're starting to go down, we're starting to see kind of some of the more typical cards. Right, we're looking at first edition cards still. There's the first edition Holo Zapdos PSA 10, right, $4,000 on there. First edition Holo Dragonite from Fossil, right, 2,200. These are becoming pretty expensive, right? Just the WotC era cards in general. I actually do need some cards for my first edition Fossil set PSA 10. I don't know how much more I want to chase them because they're getting so expensive. They're getting so hard to find. The holos are worth a lot more than they were when I first started collecting the set not too long ago. So I don't know how much I want to fight over them. This is another example of a black label. This is the same Shining Charizard that we saw before. The only difference is this is Japanese as opposed to English. There's a smaller market for Japanese cards. They do look a little bit different. So not quite as expensive, but in the same vein, they're a little bit easier to open. So that's why they do sell for a little bit less than the English cards. So this is about half of what the other one is, right? $2,100 versus $5,100. And now we're starting to get kind of into the wider scope of cards. There are some other ones that are interesting as well, but the major ones kind of at the top, right? The kind of the big money, the more iconic cards. We do see, Shadowless first edition Venusaur here. This is a thick stamp. This is one of the misprints that's not super obvious, right? You have to look for a thick stamp, right? So kind of a more niche item. First edition Holo Dark Charizard PSA 10. Or no, this is not even first edition. This is just a regular one. Wow, this card has gone expensive. Yeah, so Dark Charizard, another kind of iconic one from the Team Rocket series. Pretty expensive. Not first edition still, which surprised me. I didn't realize that the normal one would be that expensive. And now we're kind of starting to look at even a first edition Squirtle Gem Mint, $1,600. Right, this is a common in the base set. Not rare, non-common, common. Granted, much more iconic. But the fact that we have a Blastoise that's a PSA 8 at almost the same price as the Squirtle, pretty indicative of how much demand there is for first edition cards. Charmander, same boat, $1,600. Squirtle, $1,625. These are commons. There's a lot of them out there, but to have them graded well, PSA 10 draws a lot of money. And then here we start going down, kind of your more typical, just Shadowless, first edition foils, etc. Nowhere near as expensive. We do have a PSA 10, the Hidden Fates Charizard, the GX Charizard, $1,300. It is kind of opened up to debate for how difficult it is to get a PSA versus a black label. A black label, much, much more rare because you have to get perfect subgrades as well. PSA, there's a little bit more leniency without the subgrades. Getting a 10, kind of a much broader 10, right? Like there are cards where you could crack open a Gem Mint PSA 10 and not get a black label. You're very likely to not get a black label if you just open up a Gem Mint card. You're likely going to get a 9.5. It's possible to even get a 9 for BGS from a PSA 10. I've seen some pretty rough PSA 10s, right? Very lenient in grading at the time, depending on who the grader is. It's very subjective. So there's something to keep an eye on. There's quite a few 10s down here, right? These are all $1,100, $1,100 to $1,200. So there's a lot going on. We will revisit this later, but it's interesting to see kind of how the top pans out. And it is important to note, I had mentioned this before, don't get caught up in the FOMO. Don't feel like if you're trying to buy one of these as an investment, don't be rushing. Don't know what your maximum limit is, what the maximum you're willing to pay that makes sense for you as an investment piece or maybe as a collector piece. Don't get caught up in a bidding war. I've mentioned this before to people. Think rationally, do research, look at market price research, see what prices have closed for in the past, and do something that makes sense. Don't be overpaying on these. That's not smart investing, right? Don't get caught up in FOMO. Definitely not smart investing. Just follow up on them, see how they play out, and then maybe use, if you're not as familiar, maybe use the information this month to help dictate the price next month. That would be the smarter thing to do. Just take your time. There will be other opportunities, right? Just for Pokemon alone, just for this month in a PWCC cycle, 843 cards being listed. you're going to find a deal somewhere. Because of how close these close together as well, we can actually see that these two Charizards, they're sequential lot numbers. They're basically closing. I don't imagine these close more than like 10 seconds or 15 seconds apart. So there will be a deal. You can always find a different deal. Don't go out, don't overpay. And that's really the most important key takeaway to FOMO. You want to do what's smart. Don't overpay. Do your research, and don't get caught up in FOMO. So with that, that is today's episode. So I know there's a lot to go over. Some of it may be a little bit dry, a little bit boring. I do know that not everyone is super keen on following a lot of the real world stuff. I do, again, encourage people to have at least a basic understanding of it. It will help you long run in terms of understanding how these things work, in terms of understanding how investing works. It will do you a service in the future. With that said, as always, you can find me on Twitter. I'm Edwin13. You can find the social media sites for Vermilion on the right. Wherever you are in the world, be safe as always. And then we will see you all